I will not be seeing you anymore, but that's okay. Oh, no, I still do. Okay. So hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. My name is Vincent Ouellet Jobin. I work with the Montreal Urban Ecology Center. We're located in Montreal or Tiohtià:ke. Montreal or Tiohtià:ke was a meeting place for many First Nations. And it is now recognized that the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is the custodian of the land. And I just wanted to acknowledge this before speaking about participatory planning tools for the Depave project. So I'm going to talk about, how to include citizens into Depave projects in earlier stage, the planning stage. But what I'm going to show you really covers the whole, participatory planning, urban planning approach. So also, I want to apologize. There's some construction right in front of my house. So you may hear what seems like the end of the world, but it is not. It is just some small construction. So please bear with me if that ever happens. So the Montreal Urban Ecology Center, we are a nonprofit organization that was created in 1996, but it's citizens that were committed to transforming their community. We propose some practices, some policies that create a more ecological or democratic or healthy city. And in our Depave approach, we rarely do Depaves. We are most often coordinating some Depaves by some local partners. So what you'll see today is really the work of these partners, and I want to thank them. Some of them are in the audience, so thank you for being here, and thank you for all your hard work. So today what we'll see is what is the participatory planning approach, what are the benefits, why we use it. We'll also look at how we integrate that approach into the Depave process. And finally, we'll just look at some tips and some resources that are useful for successful participation at large, but mainly for Depave projects. So first of all, what is a participatory planning approach? It's a loaded term. So the official definition I'm going to give you is that it is an approach to urban planning or urban design that implies a sharing and sometimes a transfer of responsibilities towards citizens, whether they be mobilized organically or by facilitators of the process. And what that means is that basically we involve citizens in deciding how to transform their own neighborhoods, their own living spaces. Either whether it be that we, go get the citizens or they do it themselves. There's some citizen mobilization that happens in different areas, and that's maybe just fostering the inclusion of citizens in how they view and how they plan the living spaces around them. And we do that because the citizens are the experts in their own living spaces. They are the ones that have the lived experience of a particular place, and they know the problems and they know the needs of a particular space. And what we do is that we combine that knowledge with the knowledge of the professionals, so the experts in urban planning that are good at having technical solutions and everything else, but that don't necessarily know the space. So when we do that, we combine both knowledges and we can get to some maybe better projects. And it goes a little bit further than just consultation. So a normal consultative process would look like this, like the first line. So you would have maybe a brainstorm with experts, then you elaborate a project, and then you present the project to the citizens, and then at the end, you have the involvement of the public, and you only get the reaction after the project's been planned. So you're stuck with, the citizens didn't like it or they did like it. What do we do? Do we redesign the project? Well, in a participative process, you start with the public. So you do maybe a public brainstorm session, then you go and elaborate a project, and then you do some ideation workshops. You will modify the project as you go along, and then you end up with a public consultation at the end to verify that everything is really good. And usually what you'll get is, public adhesion to the particular project. And that's one of the goals of participatory planning. We like to view it on a ladder. Participation is on the ladder. So that's an image that we often use at the Montreal Urban Ecology Center, or MUEC. From now on, I will just say MUEC. So number one is the lowest level of participation. It's where you will just inform the citizens. So maybe you'll have a little session. You'll say, oh, that's what will happen here. Whereas as you go higher in the ladder, you involve citizens more to the levels 4 or 5, where it's really like engaging, negotiating, deciding together what's going to happen to the space. And the way we do Depaves under the Sous Depave initiatives is really in number 5. So you decide together what's going to happen on the particular piece of land that you're trying to depave. So why do we use participatory planning? I'm sure we could have as many reasons than there's actual Depave initiatives that we've done for. But like common reasons are, well, to better address the needs and the concerns of the citizens. So it gives them a platform to express those needs and concerns. It is also helpful to maintain the spirit of a project because you're involving the citizens, you can keep the spirit, the initial spark behind the project alive more easily. It's also good to maybe justify some new investments in the community, and also a good way to include maybe what we call tomorrow's citizens, so the youth, into some projects. It's also helpful to imagine some new solutions that maybe haven't been thought of before, and it's also helpful to help converge the needs of different actors. So it helps having a space where all the different needs can be taken into account. It's useful to test new designs to foster social acceptability. We've talked about it in terms, of depaving. There was, I can't remember who said it, but there was some pushback sometimes in cities. Well, it can help address that, specific problem because you're really working with the citizens to, alleviate that pushback, and also with its different stakeholders like the cities. And it's also useful to change some practices. So that's a few of why we do that. So how do we do that? How do we integrate that into a Depave process? So you've seen a Depave. A depaving initiative is already pretty participatory because people come in and they rip off the asphalt themselves. So, that's already pretty participatory. So, but how can we include even more? So it's really in the planning phases. Usually we say that that's how it happens in a Depave process. In the Sous process, we have 6 steps. The launch, then the second step is just understanding what happens in the space, how the water behaves, if there's like snow deposits. Exploring 3 is exploring some solutions with the citizens, deciding with the citizens. Number 4, then we act. So we depave, we plant, and then we do a little inauguration. And we always have some evaluation going on into the process to make sure our processes are always valid. So steps 1 and 2 are mostly before you prepare, you gather the information that's necessary to do your participatory planning activities. And then at step 3, that's where you start having some planning approaches, participatory planning approaches. So maybe an awareness or vision workshop or activity, and then maybe a validation workshop to decide afterwards. And then you have the depave and planting activities and the inauguration, which are the participatory activities that most of y'all know. So I won't be going over this. I will mainly focus on these 2 steps to maybe give you some examples or some ideas, or how do we proceed in certain situations. And maybe that's going to give you some inspiration, even if it's not for the particular Depave process, maybe for some other processes that you're doing, other projects that you're doing that could involve citizens in them. So let's start with the first one, the awareness and vision workshops. Why do we do them? It's basically to foster awareness towards the impact of climate change and impervious surfaces. So we really want to take the opportunity to, talk about the issues that sometimes people don't really understand or don't really know about. And we also want to stimulate the interest in the Depave initiative. It's a good way to get the spark going. We want to identify also the site-specific challenges and the elements that are to keep, and to develop a common vision for the space with all the stakeholders. So what do we do? Well, it can be, an online or in-person meeting, maybe an hour and a half, or a kiosk. The idea is to have an activity that's simple and that's adaptable in different contexts and for different target audiences. And who you want there is really the future citizens, the future users and the citizens that use the space. You want the stakeholders, so maybe the city or other organizations that are there. And of course, the site owner. That's really important because, it's his site. So what do you do usually? That's just typical format. Maybe you're going to start with describing the project, process, and goals. You really want to make sure that it's clear so that everybody knows what they're doing and what the constraints, the limits of the process. Then you address, the issues of impervious surfaces in cities, climate change, talk a bit about that. That's what we do. And then we discuss in small groups about what people like and dislike about the space and what their dreams are. So maybe we'll ask questions like, what do you do in this space? What do you like about the space? What don't you like? And then after, in a second activity would be like, oh, what would you like to do in this space? And what is your dream for the space? we try not to stop citizens from dreaming. You know, let's imagine everything we want to imagine. Of course, not everything's going to be possible. We'll have to make some choices. Maybe we can't have 4 picnic tables, but if people want a picnic table, like, we should not stop them from dreaming about that particular picnic table. And maybe we can get a cheaper one than the $1,000 one. On step 4, we come back into small groups usually, and we talk about the similarities, differences, and what has been discussed. And then we go on and do some evaluation, and we talk about the next steps. And it's always important to talk about next steps, because these are also mobilization events. You want to involve the community, so you want to tell them ahead of time what's going to happen precisely. What are the next steps? Where are they going to get involved? How are they going to get involved? This is really essential for mobilization of all the people and all the volunteers that are going to be involved in the project. After is really important. You want to collect all that information. So ideally, while you were having the discussions, you had note takers. People took notes in all the individual smaller groups. And then after the workshop, you'll clean up the notes that were taken. So maybe you can do a little table like you see on the side. You can make, I like especially the image at the bottom right. This is an example of how we visualize the activities that we sometimes do. So when we say, okay, what do you like about the space? These are what we call the stems or the leaves, the base, what you're working with, the present. And when we say, what do you dream? It's the future. So we make flowers out of it. So you can use post-its, post it on a board with some green leaves and some, pretty pink flowers. And that's a good way to represent or to visualize the objectives. So you can use that and put that in your report. You can make a pretty comprehensive report with tendencies, elements that reach consensus. And these are going to be the inputs for the plan production. So you want to have yourself somebody to work with that understands the process, that understands that's a participatory planning process, and that know that they're going to get that as an input to make the plans. And that's really important that the person you get really understands how it is, because it's a bit different than normal processes. So you want to make sure to really explain well when you're going to find the person who's going to make the plans for your site. The benefits of doing that, well, of course, you will identify with the users what are the needs for transformation in space. So you will really get a better sense of what your community wants. It's going to be a good step for data collection, as we just said, to make the plans. And it's also a good step for mobilization of the participants for the next steps. I'm not sure mobilization takes an S or a Z. So if you see other errors in my PowerPoints, I'm sorry. My French background does betray me sometimes. Some considerations you want to have is to adapt your vocabulary to your public. So you will not talk to young school-aged youth the same way as you'll address other groups. So you want to adapt your vocabulary to these specific audiences. You want to pay really attention to the needs that are expressed. Because that's what you're here for. And ideally, you'll go to the site or show pictures so that it's a bit more tangible in people's minds. How do we do then the next step? After the exploration phase, we do the plans. We tell the person with what we've discussed before, here is the inputs, go do the plans, and then we'll come back to the citizens and we'll decide on what we actually do with a validation workshop. And that's pretty simple, but it's simply just validated the design plans, but you really want to consult the users on some specific choices about the site's design, because there's constraints. You want to make sure you get everything under your budget, but you don't want to just make an activity where people are just going to come in and say like, oh yeah, we like the plans. You want to consult them on choices. You want to take that opportunity to interact with them. Don't make them come just to say that you did a nice job on the plans and that they don't even have a choice on the particular output. So just think about that if you ever do some activities like that. So yet again, it can be an online meeting or a kiosk. Very simple. You will present a plan and then just try to get adhesion of the participants to some options or different scenarios. And so you want everybody that you had previously, but also the plan's architect, because he's the one with the knowledge of what choices he made. So you want him to be there, him or her, sorry. You want them to be there to explain any decisions that they made. And usually, yet again, you do a recap on the project process and goals. So it's really important that everybody's clear on what the aim of the meeting is and the aim of the project. And then you present the plans, maybe some sketches to look at the selected ideas and what are the financial and physical constraints on the site. So maybe you'll look at some particular plans. So it can sometimes be difficult for people to see the end result just looking at plans. So maybe you'll want to use some more colors to locate some specific elements like some plants, some rocks. You may want to use sketches to give an idea of what the site actually looks like. And you can present a whole package. So a plan, a sketch, some pictures of similar designs of similar plants that are going to be integrated into the design so that people that are not necessarily good at reading plants really get a sense of what's going to happen on the site. And if you're like me and very bad at drawing, instead of doing a sketch, you can also just use a Google screenshot or a picture, and then just add some tracing paper on top and just draw the design. So that's something that I could do. It's not pretty, but it works. So that's something you can do. And then, yeah, after that, you've shown the plans and everything, you try to discuss about the issues, if there's any, and you really try to solve and to reach a consensus. You don't want to build something that people disagree with. So you really want to try and reach consensus on that. And then afterwards, you do the evaluation and you talk about the next steps. So that's also the last point you have to get your members excited, your volunteers excited about the depaving. Usually they're pretty excited about that point, but just remind them and hype them up. Benefits are that it makes it possible that you verify that you really did understand the need of the community well, and that the proposed design fits those particular needs, and that they will be used for a long time, and there's going to be some perennity. It makes it possible also to modify the plans, gives you another step to get a chance to adapt if need be. Some considerations to have. Ideas can be divergent, but you really want to arrive to a consensus. And it can also be difficult for some people to understand the plan. So as I've shown you, try to maybe use a sketch or other ways to see the end result. So let's see some examples by our partners to see, what does it look like in action. So first off, let's start with the Martin Bélanger School, which were done by two organizations, the Gamin de Ruy Saint-Pierre. And they did two different citizen meetings with different stakeholders at each one, where the questions were adapted to the context. So they had one for specific stakeholders and another one for other stakeholders. And then they summarized everything in this beautiful table that I've translated for you. So you can see some different in the what we'd like to have and see. There was a climbing wall. Okay, it's a dream. It didn't happen. But there was no trees of flowers or fruit that fall to the ground because that's too dirty. So all of these information were given to make the plans. And eventually, those are the plans. They came up, sorry, I didn't, with the final plans and the final location. So a lot cleaner look, and they had some different spaces. So there was another space like this where they depaved and planted some new species of trees to provide more shade, which was really needed in that schoolyard. We also have the Resolute plant that was done by our partners at Credo. And they did a vision workshop as well with citizens and partners, but they, instead of having just questions, they used printed maps to do the activity. So they asked people to identify with, some different materials, some different designs, what they would like on the site if there was a bench. So they asked them to draw directly on a map. So all the different teams had different little maps like this. And all the results were compiled on a bigger map, and that was given to the person that was doing the design of the plans. After that, they presented the preliminary plans, and they were very spiffy with a little blazer. I like this. And then they explained the next steps. And that's, while they were depaving, that's what we call a money shot, a lot of asphalt being taken out. And we transformed it from a very boring parking lot to a slightly less boring, but very cute, with a lot of different species. There's some fruit trees in there that were desired. And they wanted also a little garden space, but that was not possible with soil. So they decided to do, like, if you look really far over here, there's some benches, it's not some benches, some, I don't know, containers, let's say containers, to have some little plants and vegetables. So that's one way to do it with a workshop. But the Jonathan School is a different example, where they wanted to get the inputs of the kids. And they were like, we're not going to make kids sit into an hour meeting. That's not going to be useful. So instead, what they did is a kiosk at the back to school event. And they included some fun activities. So to learn about imperviousness in the cities, they made this little replica of a city with sponges that they would take in and take out to simulate what it does to, have impervious surfaces that were not impervious in a city and that would absorb the water. So we created what we call the sponge aspect of a natural city. And then they also had a little board, and kids could come and say they had 3 options, which included more of a mood. So maybe you had the biodiversity mood. Would you like to have like flowers and plants that are going to have little birds or animals or insects in them? Or would you like maybe something more colorful or something more green, but like with a different ambiance? So they all had these different little moods that kids could vote on, and the results were compiled, and then they did the designs and they transformed the very gray, full of asphalt place into a lot greener. I wish I had a better image of that site, and that's unfortunately the only image. I'll go this summer and I'll take some more pictures. So if you are interested, I'll give you some. And last example I want to show you is the Rue parking lot, which was done by the Comité des Citoyens et Citoyennes du Quartier de Saint-Sauveur in Quebec City. And this one was done during the pandemic. So instead of doing a workshop, they did an outside consultation kiosk, because that was easier to respect all this, the sanitary rules. Yeah, let's call that. And they did a consultation kiosk with a vision tree exercise, and a validation workshop as a happy hour with some food and beverages. So for the consultation kiosk, they had Post-its and they had a tree, so you could write down your idea for the future and go and add it to the tree. There were some posters that were explaining the information for the goals and processes of the project. And when they did the validation workshop, there was food, as you can see, hot dogs are very important. That's something you want to consider, because sometimes you want to address some people that have other things to do. So if you at least take care of their dinner, you may get better participation. So that's something that you may want to add. And think about, different food preferences and allergies as well. Don't have only meat sausages for us vegetarians. They also did this that I find really interesting, is that they drew with some chalk on the ground where the trees and everything would go. So the bench would go there. This would be a maple tree right there. So people could actually see where everything would be. So that's a great alternative if you can go to the site. That's what it ended up. And this is slightly different from the original plans, unfortunately. The pandemic caused some delays, and whilst there were some delays, unfortunate event happens, people passed away and plans were completely modified, but the spirit was kept. So they wanted some trees, shade, and one of the trees was planted in homage to the owner that passed away for the site. So there's still some great attachment to this site and to the people that participated into the whole process. So rapidly, some little tips and resources for successful participation. A few keys to get a successful participation is that you want to aim for the appropriate level of participation. I've shown you a process that we use for the Depave initiative. If you want to include that into your own projects, great. Sometimes it's not useful to have too much participation. If you have a very polarizing situation, maybe it's, might not be the best idea to have only participatory planning steps. You may want to change a little bit your process to have the really appropriate level and to get the most mobilization that you can. You have to know how to mobilize. So try to, pick up the phone, spread the word, maybe drop a list of your contacts at each activity so you can contact them again, contact the community leaders, your networks, institutions, citizen groups, elected officials. Sometimes they can help. Try to put a signpost on the site where the Depave is going to happen, so you can so people that pass by or the users see that something's going to happen and that they want to get involved. Try to announce activity in advance, all different ways to get better mobilization. You also want to define some very clear, measurable, and realistic goals. And then I insist, it's really important for people to know exactly what they're getting into and what the power actually is. Don't make sure that they know that there's some constraints in the whole process. There's other tips, avoid technical jargon, I've said it, work in smaller groups, more human scale, try to document the processes. So I won't list everything because we could do a whole hour and a half just on that. So if you want to know more, we have some tools and resources that can be helpful at the MUEC. So we have the Participatory Urban Planning Guide, which is available online. It explains the general process that I've talked about, but not just for Depave, but really for the whole approach to participatory planning. And it has all the little tips and tools that I've talked about. We also have the Sous Depave guide, which is only in French, but it is the participatory planning approach. I should have warmed up my mouth for this. Everything that we've seen today, it's in the guide, but only in French. We also have a website, participatoryplanning.ca, where there's some useful tools and activities and different examples of things you can do to include more participation. And we have our Sous Depave website, where we have all the different projects, and maybe you can learn a bit more about the different initiatives that were done. And if you want any of these, just contact me. On the Sous Depave website, you'll have my name and my address. Feel free to send me an email and I'll get the resources to you. It will be my pleasure. So thank you, everyone. I think we have like 3 minutes for questions, if we have any questions, because I explained very clearly. So maybe there's no questions, but feel free to ask any questions. I'm going to stop the presentation because I can't really see the chat like this.
Thank you, Vincent. And we have our first question from Susan Bryan, she, her, from Washtenaw County. Would you like to unmute yourself to ask your question, or should we just read it?
I can unmute myself. I was wondering, how do you get people to show up to your workshop events, especially the second one? And I've heard of people presenting at already established community groups, like at the elementary school, a meeting that's already happening, or like, what are some of your strategies that you use to get people to show up?
That's a very good question, and you said it. So piggyback on some things that are actually already happening. So we've seen one of the kiosk bus during the back to school event. So that's a great way to do it. Depending on where you're going to do your Depave, you're going to have a different approach. But the goal is really to look at what the stakeholders are, where you're going to do the site. For example, there was one in Quebec City that was done near on the border of low-income housing project. And so, well, there was some flyers that were applied to the walls everywhere. And to entice people to come, we did, as I talked about, we did offer food. Well, I say we. My partners offered food and drinks, so make it enticing is really important. It's really all about making sure that you're finding the way to connect with your citizens. So when I said maybe, if you're doing that in a private parking lot when there's no actual users, if you make a little signpost and you say like, we want to transform this space, we want to plant flowers, are you interested? And then you put a link, or we're all used to QR codes now, thanks to the pandemic. So these are all different useful tools that you can use, but really the goal is to get to see people where they are. Pretty much it.
Thank you.
Our second question comes from Haley Goodchild, she, her, from Greenup. Would you like to unmute yourself to ask your question?
Sure, I can. I remember what my question was. Scroll back up. Right. So I've coordinated participatory planning workshops like this before. And one thing that I find challenging is that despite encouraging people early on to think about the space in terms of experiences they want to have, I often find people are in a rush to get to features, right? They want to talk about things they want to see and bypass that conversation about why, like to what end. And I wonder if you have any suggestions for how to keep those conversations sort of focused on that initially before we get to, oh, I want a tree here or whatever it may be. Oh, the experience I want is to not overheat in a space. I just find that tricky.
Yeah, it's always good not to overeat in this particular space. So if I get it to the question, how do you keep conversations happening on target, maybe? Or how do you keep the bigger vision or the bigger goal before moving on to the specifics? And I think part of it is you will have I didn't show the first two steps, but when you're understanding the particular site or when you're doing your, the ecosystem, you want to look at all the stakeholders that are there and talk about with the owner and set the goals with a closer, tightly knit group. So you want to give the goal, the purpose, the vision. So more like the goals and the really set with the owner of the site, because they will be the ones deciding at the end of the day what's going to be there. So that's really a bit more of a before process. And then when you get into the workshops, then you're just delineating the goals. And when you go for the vision, you can propose things. So we've seen, like in the kiosk, you had different moods. So you can go for higher. You can start with an activity where you're just going to go higher up and propose, like, here is one type of mood we could have, another type of mood, or another one. What feels like more appropriate for the space? Which do you feel more drawn to? So get these maybe types of questions, prepare in advance your questions and your materials so that you're actually giving not only abstract concepts, but maybe have some visuals so that people can really see what you want from them. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Our next question is from Greenup, and we welcome you to unmute.
Hi, Vincent. One of the things you talked about was, taking feedback in a workshop and then providing validation. I'm curious if there's a participant ratio that you think is important to have in that validation session, be it the same participants or different participants, but, if you had 50 people at the first one, do you need 25 at the second session to feel like the validation is accurate, or I think you get what I mean there.
Yeah. Validation is always, I'll say, less sexy. So, it's harder to get people to come. So that's why you want to make sure that you're going to ask questions, that you're going to make it motivational, like decide on specific options. But for a ratio, you just try to do your best, and what you'll get is what you have to work with. Try to have everybody that you had at your first session, and then even contact some more people at the second one. So at the first session, get all the phone numbers, the emails, contact them directly. People still like the phone. So try to do that to keep as many people as you can for the participants. But yeah, there's no. We haven't reached to we have to have at least 50% of the people that were present to make it validate the process. We try to get as much as we can and then make way with. But I would say at least 50% if you're trying to do it, because that's just in the idea, in the spirit of the project.
Thanks.